Welcome to another episode of my Wake-Up Call. This is the podcast where I get to know a little bit about people, and then in the process of getting to know them better, I want to introduce that conversation to you, my listeners and subscribers. Today's guest is a little bit of an exception because Thayer Cheatham Willis and I have known each other for some years, but we don't hang out as much as we should, but hopefully we will change that going forward. But you're going to want to find out her story and what she's about. She's an internationally acclaimed author, educator, speaker, and leading authority in the area of wealth counseling. Her maiden name, Cheatham, is, if you know anything about railroads, you may know that it's connected to the Georgia Pacific Railroad, and she comes from that family. And for a while, she was a little bit clueless. You know, she came from wealth and she didn't know any better. But then what happened is she learned, there's a dark side to this. Wealth sometimes cannot be the best thing to have and to live with and work your way through. And she wrote a book called Navigating the Dark Side of Wealth, a Life Guide for Inheritors, which really took that on. And that was really in the midst of her also becoming qualified as a therapist, a social worker, someone who deals with families about these issues. She's written columns for a number of publications. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. She has another book called Beyond Gold, True Wealth for Inheritors, which focuses on how to be responsible with their wealth in their lives and keep it in perspective. And she joins us now, Thayer Willis. We're going to drop the Georgia Pacific name because she said she doesn't use it that much, especially when she orders food to go, probably. But Thayer, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Mark. And right out of the starting gate, I do have a correction, and that is that Georgia Pacific is a forest products company. I know it sounds like a railroad because of Union Pacific, but it actually is a forest products company. And you wouldn't necessarily know that. And my family was involved, over 50 years ago and before that.
That is a great correction because I'm thinking, Union Pacific, but you're right. I remember Georgia Pacific products.
Yes.
Where would I have seen them? Because
paper towels and all kinds of paper products. And even today, in many restrooms, there are paper towel dispensers that say Georgia Pacific on them. And you would see the name on siding when they're building buildings. It's sometimes present. Many rail cars when they transported everything by rail. So it was a big presence. And mostly you would have seen the paper products and corrugated, I think it's called corrugated cardboard, and all the boxes. They used to be the main producer of those.
Well, thank you for the correction. And I'm not sure if it was my ADD or my burgeoning Alzheimer's that kicked the real definition of Georgia Pacific, but you have corrected it for all time in my mind. Thank you.
Okay, we got that now.
There you go. So I will tell you ask you what I ask all my guests, which is, as you look at your life, what's been the through line or your purpose, and tell us the story of how you arrived at that.
It wasn't a very straight line journey, as with many people. I grew up in a family which was wealthy, although as a child, I had no perspective on that. I had friends who were all from families that had financial resources, and none of us talked about that or reflected on that. As children, you don't. So I did grow up with many advantages and privileges and education and many benefits of growing up. And I had a great mother and father, and I have a brother and sister, and it was a good upbringing. my parents, though, had grown up in much more modest circumstances. They knew nothing about raising children with all of these many resources. And I started taking a lot of things for granted, became fairly entitled. And, the colloquial term is spoiled brat. I mean, I don't think I was really obnoxious to people, but pretty self-centered. And so I had a rocky journey through my 20s and in and out of relationships, and wasn't really very happy, didn't really find anything that I really wanted to do passionately. I just, I rode and jumped horses. I loved that, but that's not a very easy place to make a career. And so I eventually reached a point where I got into a program of personal growth, and due to a wonderful teacher I had there, realized that I was behaving like a spoiled brat and I needed to make some different decisions and get a better attitude. And I did. And I got on my feet. And actually, when I have spoken to audiences, I also speak as a professional speaker. I always tell my story at the beginning. It takes about 10 minutes. And I do talk about having had so much trouble in my 20s and then having encountered this great teacher and this program and got on my feet. And then I wanted to help other kids who grew up in circumstances like me, because I did some research and I found there was no one focused on that particular group. There are plenty of people, of therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists focused on various mental health groups and on the people who are the most disadvantaged in our society. All these groups have professionals who have specialized in helping them, but there was nobody helping inheritors. And I saw a great need for that. So that really led to me developing the work that I do now.
So can you unpack? We do have time. I mean, if it's only 10 minutes, I could, go grab a cup of coffee, because you whetted our appetite. And can you share some of that? And what I'd like to rubberneck along with my listeners is some aha moments when you said, I'm a spoiled brat. Or
Well,
and it's not working out for me, but
yeah.
But how you then pivoted, or how you turned the corner, or maybe you found this enlightened person who enabled you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really me realizing it all by myself. It was this teacher that I mentioned, and I'll tell you about him. I can't really tell my story the way that I do when I speak, because I act out parts of it, and I can't really do that without getting up and moving around. So I can't do it exactly like that, but I certainly can tell you the high points. And one of them was that a friend of mine, one time I ran into a friend, and I had been married and divorced twice right before I saw him, very quickly. All of it was, within a couple of years. And he could took one look at my face and he could see that I was not doing very well. So he said, "Hey, I just came from a program of personal growth. It was amazing. It was transformational for me. And I think you should go." Well, I was in enough pain that I said, okay. So he picked me up a few days later and drove me up there, dropped me off, and it's no longer there. I've had many people ask me, where is this place? I want to send my kid, but no, it's not there anymore. But it was a wonderful thing for me, and it was great timing that I got to go there. And it was a teacher there who said to me one day, after not knowing me for very long, but he is brilliant. His name is Barry Fisher. And he, to this day, now, later, jumping ahead, he is a friend of mine. But in those days, he was my teacher. And he said, "You are a spoiled brat. You are an ingrate. And until you give up those attitudes, you will never have a meaningful life." Well, when he said that to me, I was devastated. I barely held myself together, and ended up going back to my little cabin and by myself, and they all left me alone. And finally, the next morning, I was still alone. I was sitting out on my step, and he came walking up, and he said, "Well, how are you doing?" And I said, "Not very well." And he said, "Are you ready to work?" And I said, well, and he started to walk away. And I said, wait. It's just that if I give up who I've been, I don't know who I'll be. And he said, right, that's your fear. I know who you'll be. You'll be that beautiful person that's been locked up inside of a spoiled brat all these years.
Mm.
And I said, oh, okay, well then, yes, I'm ready to work. So off I went with him to class and stayed in those classes. I was there for 4 months and came out of it determined to have some kind of meaningful work, which I did work my way into. And I was able to create this practice where I help inheritors and their families. I do work with individuals and families. Again, I worked into it gradually. I didn't know how to do it. There was nobody doing it. This was in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I now know there were a couple of people who were also thinking about the beginnings of this, but we didn't know each other. So I feel so fortunate that I've gotten to be a pioneer in this work. Now there are hundreds of professionals in this work, and many who touch on it in their work too, of helping wealthy families with their relationship dynamics, their communication, knowing their values, understanding that there's more to wealth than the financial resources.
Can you share breakthroughs that you've seen and observed? Because and I love the phrase that you used. I hope you've written it down, of if I give up who I've been, I don't know who I'll be. I mean, there's something that is just lip smacking eloquent about that. But can you share, how people make those breakthroughs, and have you emulated this teacher with people, in your own tone, saying, you seem a tad spoiled and you're not going to have much of a life unless you do something about it? Or can you unpack that? Because I think my listeners are kind of rubbernecking. Yeah, well, how do you let go of who you've been, and how do you make it to the next step without falling through the cracks?
Yes. And really what it has to do with is fear and pain. And when life comes crashing down around you, remember, I had been married and divorced twice in 2 years, right before I ran into the friend who told me about this program, and I went up there. So I was in a tremendous amount of pain. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a family. I had come from a marriage and family, my parents and the family we had was great. And I was completely unable to do that. And I was just devastated. So I think that a key is the pain and fear when life comes crashing down around you. And it was just at that moment that I ran into a friend who helped me direct me to a place where I was able to grow in ways that I needed to. And of course, that's available to anyone. The challenge is to reach a person with that message at the right time and to be able to have the resources to do it. Now there are a lot of books people can read. There are more resources now than even then. So I think really, to answer your question, a lot of it is the fear and pain that comes from having gotten yourself into a lot of trouble. And I suppose there's a certain degree of taking responsibility for that, because I was well aware that I had created all the trouble in my life.
I'm a bit of a trauma expert. I did write PTSD for Dummies, and I have a recent book on why cope when you can heal and trauma to triumph. And I know in working with veterans or people who've been through horrendous traumas like veterans go through, is there's a point at which they start to fall apart, and they feel that they could fall apart and never come back, that they could literally shatter and never come back. And sadly, that's often when veterans will reach for a gun, and while they still have a little control, if they are convinced I'm going to shatter and never come back, sometimes their last act of control is to take their own life. But it's also a moment when a number of them will learn how to surrender and they'll be holding a gun and they'll say, God, I don't want to die, but I can't take it anymore. And that's why many of them, when you say, what saved you, they'll often say, God. And really what happened is they were able to surrender, as opposed to feeling that I'll fall apart and I'll never come back together again. So I'm not sure if that's more of a male metaphor, because women seem to have a way of connecting to other people in ways that men don't. Men often get stuck in this, I am what I do and I can't do it anymore, so I'm not worth anything. And if I'm not worth anything, what good am I? And I can't take it anymore. But can you understand any of what I just said?
Yes, that's a very interesting point you just made about that women often get more connected to other people. And in fact, I would say that did happen to me when I went to this program, which was in a remote location. I did inherently trust the teachers there, and I did connect with the people. One interesting thing that happened when it was there, I've been raised in the Christian faith as a child. We went to church, and that was a big part of our lives. But I had wandered away from that during college years and after. And in this program, they were all on a path, and it's an Eastern path. And we were required to go to their meetings once a week. What was so striking to me was that what they were teaching in their meetings were all the principles I remembered from Christianity about being kind, loving one another, being respectful, having integrity, all these things. That's what they were teaching. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is just what I learned in Christianity so many years ago. And in fact, after I came back from that program, one of the first things I did was I called a friend who I knew went to church, and I said, can I go to church with you? And she said, yes. I went to church again for the first time in about 10 years and have gone ever since. And so that it was a turning point. And I have no doubt that it was God who led me to that program, who put me in those circumstances where I woke up again, spiritually woke up and came back to the Christian church. And so yes, that was a component of it. I don't usually tell the story that way because that connection really became real for me after I returned from the program.
Yeah, and I can understand you don't want people to take it out of context and say, oh, so this is a born again story. So this is all about Christianity and this is all about such and such. And you don't want them to take the lessons you learned and the journey you were on out of context and miss the message, which, you really do have to reach a point where you just can't take the pain and suffering that is self-induced. And I guess it helps when you reach for something. It's like a drowning person. When you reach for something, there's something there. It's not an illusion. There actually is a hand or a program or
yes,
a life preserver. Yeah.
Yes, the teacher who was most influential to me, as I mentioned earlier, whose name is Barry, and who now he and his wife we're very good friends with them. And he has often said, he says to me, you have great karma. You came to us at this program and got the best of what we had to offer. They went on and had all kinds of problems and they fell apart. But I was there. It was a teaching program. I happened to be there when they were at their strongest. And I do attribute that to God leading me into it. I mean, I just needed that to get on my feet. And that's how I think of it a lot. And that's why I tell my story at the beginning of presentations, including presentations to families and big extended families, because my message really is that if I can go through all this stumbling and being a spoiled brat and I can get on my feet, your kids can too. That's why I tell my story.
What are some of the challenges you run into in such families that you have to they have to overcome? It's not you have to overcome, but they have to overcome them to be willing to take that step. I guess they have to recognize we do have a problem. It's not getting any better. It's only getting worse. We're starting to see certain crises happening more and more often, and they're not just accidental. So what are some of the challenges that you see that you have to overcome or help people overcome before they're willing to say, I've had enough, let's make this
Well,
better?
you're right that they need to be ready to work. And I referred to that even a little while ago when in that question that Barry asked me, are you ready to work? And I asked that in my work as well. And I've often said I work with thirsty horses. I work with people who want to work with me. I have to work pretty hard to find me. I'm independent. I'm not associated with a big institution of any kind. They have to work to find me. And so that's good because then there's some motivation there. And a lot of times what they're struggling with in their families is having given these kids too much too soon. A lot of times that's what has happened, which kind of is what happened to me. In my case, I was able to climb out of that, and my parents certainly meant well. But when, often the different generations in families grow up in very different circumstances, especially when there's an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, and the family becomes very wealthy all of a sudden, or in a short period of years. And so the different generations grow up in different circumstances, and the parents don't really understand that they need to allow their kids to have the same kinds of opportunities that they had to fall and scrape their psychological needs and knees and not have the parents save them, but to have to figure out how to get themselves up and get themselves going. So, I do say that to wealthy families sometimes, don't rob these kids of having the same kinds of opportunities to make a meaningful life for themselves that you had and that you benefited from so much. If parents make their kids' lives too cushy, those kids are not going to thrive. And we all see it. Parents don't mean any harm. They often mean to give their kids things they wish they could have had when they were 18 or 21 or 25. And they don't understand that actually it was the struggle that gave them so much strength and that contributed a lot to their success. So a lot of times I teach about that, and I will teach that in front of everybody, in front of the young adults and the parents. And I talk about the importance, the necessity of these young adults getting out in the world, making a meaningful life for themselves. A lot of times I'll tell parents, we all inherit assets in life. For some people, it's great athletic ability or great intelligence or fabulous good looks. For some people, it is financial resources. We all inherit some kinds of assets, but the one thing no one inherits is a meaningful life. No one is given a meaningful life. We are all meant to build that for ourselves. Once parents understand that, it's sometimes it's just hearing somebody say that, and the parents go, oh yeah, I get it. And then they understand they need to stop supporting their 30-year-olds, and they need to, or even their 25-year-olds. These kids need to get out and find a way to make a life for themselves. And that's how they will have success, however they define success. The definition of success needs to be up to the kid too, but that they need to have the motivation to do it.
Can you unpack meaningful life?
By that, I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you think about what you're doing that day and you're eager to get up and get at it. So whether it's a job, whether it's a cause, a foundation, a volunteer opportunity is fine. It just needs to be something where you are contributing, and you get to define how you're contributing, just like you get to define success. It just needs to be something where you feel like you're being constructive and purposeful, and you're doing something that's making a difference.
What's the difference between purposeful and meaningful?
Oh, I have actually worked with those two, and they're somewhere in all my files. I have definitions of each. I wish I had that in front of me right now because it's subtle. Um, Meaningful is where it, it reaches me, and it's something that arouses my interest and my curiosity and my motivation to work with it, whatever it is. That's meaningful. Purposeful is slightly different in that it's where I am doing something where I'm using that understanding, and I'm causing some work to happen, causing some results, some kind of steps that are going to help others.
So purposeful is more the activity, and that but it's a different kind of activity than purposeless activity that will often result in a meaningful life. My life has been meaningful, and my way of getting to a meaningful life is to be purposeful in my actions.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it makes sense. And the two are related. They're just not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll share something with you. Getting back to entrepreneurs, a friend of mine's son died by suicide. His name is Jason Reed. He was a podcast guest, and he and I have been doing presentations to entrepreneurial communities, either YPO, there's a younger version, EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization. So not too long ago, we gave a presentation where he shares the story of what the signs that he missed with his 14-year-old, and how we can't be passive with our kids being on the internet at age 8, seeing things that would horrify us. And I remember in our conversation with this audience, I shared this insight from a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur and is just so centered. And I said, "What's the secret to your being so centered?" And I've never heard it quite said this way. He said, "The way my parents raised me was they would give me everything I needed, but I had to earn everything I wanted."
That's excellent.
Oh boy, was it, meaning, we'll give you a roof over your head. We'll supply food and whatever. But if you want something, do chores. And I thought, and I'll tell you, I said it to the audience, probably 400 EO members with their spouses. And I said, we're both, one of the things you and I have in common is how horrified we are that we didn't even come close to that with our kids.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's so hard to be a great parent, and we all want to, and we all put in the effort, but yeah, it's hard to do it really well.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments as I was learning this work, I was co-leading a little workshop with a colleague, Dirk Youngie, and it was early on, and it was on parenting in wealthy families. And a woman said, "Well, what do I say when my son says, 'Mommy, are we rich?'" And I was gathering my thoughts, and Dirk said, "I'll tell you what to say." And he said, I've repeated this at least 500 times since, because it was great. He said, "I'll tell you what to say. Tell them you're going to get a great starter kit. You're going to get a great education. You're going to get some money to get started in a home, some money to start a business, but you are not going to get so much that you won't have to work." I love that answer. And there's no numbers in it. And, some people kind of complain about that, or they, if there's hundreds of millions of dollars, they say, "Well, how is that true?" Well, it's kind of a philosophical answer, and it's really reveals the attitude of the parents. And yet it can apply over a great range of numbers. But the idea is, yeah, you're going to get a great starter kit. Pay attention. You're going to get your education. Think about a business you would want to start, because, you present me a business plan. We make sure we take that to, the business advisor and get that, okayed. and we'll fund that and get you started in a house, someplace to live that's good and sound. But you are not going to get so much that you don't have to work. I think that is a great message.
Yeah, it's a wonderful message, but I think just as the message with my friend from his parents, I think you have to follow up the message with actions. I mean,
Yes.
as soon as that child wanted something and didn't want to work for it, you have to be consistent. And with the message you're sharing, as soon as that child wants something beyond the starter kit, you need to be able to set boundaries. Can you talk about setting boundaries? And where wealthy or inheritors will push back and try to grind you down and push you to cave in and get them that BMW, as opposed to they're doing summer chores to work towards getting their first not so expensive car.
Right. So that is very difficult. It's one thing for me to say it. And as you quickly realized, it's very difficult for parents to do when they have the resources, and most parents would rather direct the money to where they want it to go, including their offspring, rather than taxes or whatever. I mean, people, it's hard to get parents to really take a stand, and those funds that could easily be available, and to say no, and to say, we need to see you taking action on your own. I mean, you can make a kind of a stair step program where, for instance, sometimes in family businesses, they'll say to the young adults, they'll say, okay, well, you have to start this when they're teenagers. You need to work outside the family business, and you need to have some success there, and you need to get a promotion before you ever consider asking us to come back into this family business. Now, again, that's boundaries. Many family businesses will not do that. They're eager for the labor. They're eager to have it be a family member. But if you can prioritize the well-being of this young person over whatever ideas you have of success for them, then that helps. If you can, if that the fact that, whatever you went through to get started, for me, starting my business, I had no idea what to do. I tried this, I tried that. Some things worked, some things kind of worked, whatever. I mean, I know that all of that made me stronger as a therapist and a resource for these wealthy inheritors, because I went through all these things, and including some things that didn't work very well or just fell flat or whatever. But if I had not gone through all of that, I wouldn't have gotten as good at what I do. And that applies to everybody. And it applies to all these kids in wealthy families. And I mean, I sometimes tell parents they need to gather the discipline to say no and later. I mean, you can, put some things off. You don't have to say no forever, no, but you can say, I need to see you take some steps successfully. You choose the steps. I need to see that. Then, check in with me on this in a year.
You just dropped a nugget that I think you should write an article on, and the title of it would be Work Elsewhere and Get a Promotion. That's the title of it, because it just crystallized something. Because I've heard from a lot of family businesses, yeah, we want them to work somewhere else, and we hope they'll be successful. But when you said at least get a promotion, that means that someone outside your family has evaluated them, reviewed them, and saw that their performance was well enough so that they got a promotion. But you just dropped a nugget that I thought was just, you've shared a lot of great things, but that was one of those hidden in plain sight, oh my God moments.
Well, good. I mean, I want these things that I discover to be useful to people. And so I'm glad you highlighted that. And, if there's a family that uses that, great.
Well, I think they will. I think they will. So what's on the docket for you in the next year or two? Are you going to be doing more of what you're already doing, or is there some focus that you'd like to dig in more deeply with?
I have found that the work I like best is working with individuals and families privately. Families sometimes are extended families, so it can be 18, 20, even 70 or 80 people. And that's the work I like best. And I actually, I'm liking it better than professional speaking. I have loved speaking. I'm not crazy about the travel and the travel delays and all that stress, especially with the pandemic shutdown. I got kind of like, oh, wow, it's kind of nice to not do that, the travel part. So I have really become more focused on just my work with individuals and families. And that's what I anticipate doing. I have a handful of families that I work with, and that's plenty. Sometimes they do an annual retreat. Sometimes if they're working on something, they'll meet more often, but that usually has to do with a transition. And so I love that. I love all the challenges of it. And, there's family members with many different points of view and different priorities, different objectives. And I like helping families with that.
That is great. And sometimes on these podcasts, I talk to the audience who's listening. And if you're listening in, and if you think, well, I can't relate to this because I'm not an inheritor, there's a lot that you can learn from Thayer. And part of what I'm taking from it is how difficult it is to set boundaries and stay consistent and not be ground down. And I think you can learn a lot from finding out more about Thayer and her work and her books. But I would think, do you ever give talks just specifically on saying no or setting boundaries?
I haven't, though I have given talks on communication skills, which, that's certainly touches on that. I haven't done one on saying no. That's great though.
So I'm going to give you a title for, here's a talk or a book. You should write an article because I give away titles. So the title of it is Just Say No and Duck.
That's a good one.
That's yours. Just say, how to deal with the entitled family member. Just say no and duck.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's a reality. There have been families, often a son, often the oldest son, when they bring me in to do what I call financial literacy education, which does include some financial terms and some legal terms. And it also includes a lot of psychology and relationship dynamics. Often there is a son who, usually it's a son who, all they want to know is how much money is there and when do I get it? I mean, I'm wanting to start at A and they will only want to talk from Z. And so, there's a big learning curve there.
Any tips on that? Because I'm already visualizing over my career, there's been many sons who fit that criteria of how much money do I get and how soon do I get it? Any ways or tips how you can disabuse that son of that notion that that's just going to happen and they don't have to do anything?
Well, if I'm there, I say it because the parents know what I do and they know what I'm going to present. And so I tell these young people, that is a step, that is a later step. We have many steps that we're going to do on this journey before we get anywhere near that, before we even introduce any numbers. And we need to see you working on this and doing the research and whether it's learning about investments, learning about the philanthropy, learning about some legal terms and legal principles, whether it's your own work and you being out there in the world working successfully at something. We need to see all of this before any numbers get introduced. And it's long after that that anything gets turned over to you. So you need to figure out a life you're going to make for yourself before any of that happens.
Do you vet the families that you work with? Because if you know you're going to work with this dynamic, they can't buckle. I mean,
Yes.
they have to be committed to backing up what you're basically sharing, which is all this common sense that's hidden in plain sight.
Well, I do my best. And in fact, it's great you use the term common sense, because sometimes I even feel a little embarrassed because I really feel like what I teach is common sense. I don't teach any brilliant ideas. I mean, it's the opposite of being some kind of genius. It's really, I just teach common sense. But our society has gotten so far away from common sense that there is actually room for someone to come in and teach common sense. And so, yes, that is really the bottom line of what I teach. And you asked me if I vet families. Well, I do my best. I am very clear about what I teach, just like I have been with you today. And I want them to be able to not be surprised and to buy into my perspective and my position and what I'm going to be teaching in their families. And so I talk to them about that, because otherwise it's a waste of everybody's time and money. If we're going to get in the retreat, say we've got a 3 or 4 day retreat, and I'm introducing these concepts on day 1, and the parents know they're not going to comply, well, then it's a waste of time and money for all of us to be there. So yes, I do my best to make sure the parents know what I teach.
I wonder if there's a parallel as you're talking, just like there's a parallel with children needing to go out and show a track record of having worked elsewhere or towards something and been promoted. Maybe there needs to be a track record in your vetting of, can you tell us one instance where you said no and held firm?
Ooh, that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
I have never asked that question.
Yeah, where you just said no to something, which was a pushy impulse from one of your children,
Yeah.
and you didn't back off, because if you have never been able to stay firm on a no, the likelihood of your being able to do it with our working together is pretty small.
Yes, and actually there's another complicating factor. There's so many blended families now where the original parents of the young adults are no longer married to each other. In fact, they're probably married to other people. So there's 4 parenting adults in the room or in the family. And it can be complicated, as you would know.
You also see kids playing one against the other all the time and twisting what they say. Yeah.
Yes. And that is intensified when it's actually a divorced family. So yeah, that can make things harder. But, parents can still handle this well. I mean, I'm an optimist, and, I have great faith in human resilience, and yes, parents can handle this well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, my friend Thayer. And thank you for
welcome.
The lesson. You've taught me a lot about entitlement and how to stand up to it so that you don't have to regret it later in life. And where's the best place for people to find out more about you?
Well, there's my website, which is just my name, ThayerWillis.com. So that's the easiest place. If you just type my name into the internet or into Google, my website will come up. And then my books are on Amazon.
And one of the things I appreciate is that your name is spellable. No one can spell my last name. So ThayerWillis.com, and there's much more there. And you've just gotten more than a taste, you've gotten a meal. But if you're listening in and you're dealing with anybody in your life who's a tad bit too entitled for his or her own good, you might want to check that out and make sure that you keep her and her work as a resource for some of the people you know who may be having too much money and it's not working for them. So
Well, thank you.
thank you, Thayer. It's been wonderful. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. And again, please subscribe and leave reviews if you have a moment at Apple Podcasts. And until next time, when those wake up calls come your way, wake up or go back to bed and wait for the next one, but wake up sooner than later. You'll be glad you did. Take care, everyone.